is no license, there's no degree, there's no resume, there's no credential that ensures that someone is wise and insightful, much less that they have a correct understanding of the human condition.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we're talking about somebody that, quite frankly, I had never heard of before a few weeks ago because my Discord server brought it to my attention. We're talking about Matt Walsh today because besides the fact that he is like recycling the same tired, ultra-conservative talking points as all of the other talking heads, he now apparently has an issue with therapy. So he made this whole video. We're going to talk more about Matt Walsh's pile of lies later that he sits upon to try to like espouse this advice. But for now, we're going to talk about this video that he made on his YouTube channel called Here's Why Therapy Isn't Always a Good Thing. So we're also watching this at 1.25 speed, to be clear, because he does the old man cadence where he talks really slow. I think in the hopes that we'll think what he's saying is profound, but mostly it's just really annoying to me. So we're going to watch this a little faster than we normally would. So that's that. Let's watch this video.
If you are in therapy, you're probably wasting your time. Worse, you're probably doing yourself more harm than good. That's the case that I want to make today in this segment. But first, let's establish some necessary background to begin with. That starts with this. Recently, The Hill published a report telling us what we already know, which is that Americans love going to therapy. According to the outlet, quote, the number of Americans seeking mental health treatment is almost twice as high as it was 2 decades ago, reflecting a historic recent decline in mental health, but also an increase in virtual care and positive trends of destigmatization. In 2004, just 13% of adults said that they had visited a therapist, psychiatrist, or other mental health professional within the past year, according to Gallup polling. In 2022, that number was up to 23%. Now, to put this in perspective in terms of raw numbers, if these percentages are accurate, then somewhere around 60 million adults in this country are in therapy. Reading on, quote, a majority of psychologists reported seeing more patients seek help for disorders related to anxiety, depression, or stress in 2020, and again in 2021 and 2022, according to an annual survey from the American Psychological Association. Many health experts link to increased demand to plummeting mental health during the pandemic, which led to spikes in the numbers of Americans reporting depression and anxiety. Some health experts think the numbers tell another story, however, one about the success of teletherapy. Now, it's important to note that success in this sentence doesn't mean that this type of therapy has proven effective at helping people solve their problems. It just means that teletherapy has become more and more common as therapy customers find it easy and convenient to sit in the comfort of their own homes and attend therapy over FaceTime. This is part of what has increased the demand. You know, it's what is driving the increased demand. The article also puts a lot of the blame on COVID. But these are all trends that far predate COVID and FaceTime. In fact, I found an article from the American Psychological Association noting the significant increase in Americans seeking mental health services, and that article was published in 2004. So in 2004, they were already noticing this big increase in people going to therapy, and now we know, compared to 2004, it's doubled since then.
Yes.
The trends become even more evident when you break it down generationally. The Hill notes that...
Just really quick, I'm really trying to be not the person who pauses this video every 10 seconds, but okay, listen, let's just level set about a couple of things. First and foremost, I don't understand the smoking gun affect that we have about the number of Americans who have attended therapy has doubled, as if this indicates something terrible. First and foremost, let's talk about the fact that as a culture, as a society, as a collective of human beings, it's exceedingly common for things to gain in popularity over time. For example, health-seeking behaviors. This is not a surprise. But also, we talked about this in the video where this was a while ago. I'll put it up here in regards to why people are having children later and later in life, or why people are not having kids at all, which is that we can't just ignore the state of affairs, right? The general population. The truth is that it's more expensive, it's more difficult, it feels more dangerous for a lot of people to just fucking be alive. And for that to correlate with increases in anxiety and depression and psychological disorders is not surprising to me, right? And that's not just because I'm a clinician who thinks about therapy a lot, right? This is a pretty well observed and understood phenomenon that makes logical sense to most people who don't have their heads up their asses. I think the other thing about this that's really important for us to acknowledge is something we've talked about on the channel before also, which is that there is a lot of hubbub about for example, ADHD diagnoses. This happened in the early 2000s. It's happening now with autism as well, where people are people are being diagnosed more often than they were. So clearly where I'm making it up. I'm like, no, that's literally not the case. What's happening is that we as a culture have gained a collective language and awareness for something that has been happening for like the entirety of time. We just didn't know how to describe that. We didn't understand what the warning signs were. We had no idea what the symptoms looked like. And we especially did not have an understanding of how those symptoms presented themselves in marginalized populations, because those populations historically have been silenced. And so now what we're seeing, especially like in regards to autism, for example, is that we as a psychological community have developed a greater awareness and a better understanding for like symptomatology as it relates to femme presenting people, right? Like femme, AFAB, people who are like, you know, receiving misogyny. We understand now more what autism looks like and how it presents in that population. So diagnosis numbers have gone up. It's not that we as mental health professionals are cooking the books and we're just like have a specific desire for there to be lots of femme autistic people. It's just that we, imagine that, over the course of our profession have learned more. We learn things over time. And so that's meant that we're better at doing our fucking jobs. I know that that's a concept that's probably foreign to somebody who doesn't have a college degree to rub together between his meaty little hands. But the thing that I really want to encourage people to remember, again, about this phenomenon is that media often presents these things as though it's like evidence of a conspiracy theory. And the truth is that if you sit down and you think critically about what these trends mean, what these reports actually mean for like longer than 2 seconds, it becomes very evident that actually this makes great logical sense, that this is not a conspiracy theory or a sign of some kind of like psychologist takeover. The truth, again, is just that as disciplines in any regard evolve, we gain a better understanding for the work that we're trying to do. And we're also more effective now than ever, especially with the advent of social media, about how to disperse that information to the public. So people generally as a collective are more aware of that information, which correlates with increases in like diagnoses. For example, I'm just really frustrated that a man who like unironically dressed himself like a lumberjack without a college degree showed up on his little living room desk to make this video to talk about how therapy is a conspiracy when like, no, it's not. And also like, what proof have you provided? An article from The Hill? Good one. Just like, what the fuck is that? Anyways, let's keep going.
Big Autism is paying therapists to diagnose autism.
Obviously, yeah. There's a secret autism conglomerate. The APA just forgot to make an Illuminati payment, and that's why it's all coming out now. Okay, before we talk more about that, I want to talk to you about this week's sponsor, which is Delete Me. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that removes your personal information from hundreds of data brokers online, which if you have been here for a while, you will know that I feel strongly, not only about my personal privacy, but about people's right to maintain their privacy generally. And so I was really excited to work with a company like Delete Me because I genuinely really trust them. Okay, so in case you didn't know, data brokers are corporations that crawl the internet and social media sites looking for your personal identifiable information like your social security number or your birthday or even your relatives' information that they then will package up and sell in a little profile about you to other data brokers or other people who have an interest in your data. I think we're all aware at this point that our online activity is being tracked, but unfortunately, the info that data brokers are collecting and selling about you can facilitate some really scary stuff like identity theft, which is why I appreciate Delete Me so much. When you join deleteme.com, they will generate you a privacy report within 7 days, and then they can remove you from hundreds of data brokers online, and they also continually monitor the sites to keep you removed, which can help to protect you from things like identity theft. I was shocked when I saw my dashboard because even though I'm pretty conscious about keeping my info private, Delete Me still found and removed all of this for me. Delete Me also hooked me up with a special discount code for all of y'all so that you can protect yourselves too. You can get 20% off of your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/MickeyAtkins and use promo code MickeyAtkins. That's joindeleteme.com/MickeyAtkins with promo code MickeyAtkins. Thank you so much to Delete Me for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and jump back in.
As of 2019, which means that all these numbers are higher now, 37% of Gen Z had received therapy, 35% of millennials, and 26% of Gen Xers. So it's clear that something like COVID is a relatively minor factor.
Yes,
therapy
obviously.
is becoming more and more popular, generation after generation, and these trends have been observable for decades. Which is interesting when you consider, again, the very first sentence of this article, which says, the number of Americans seeking mental health treatment is almost twice as high as it was 2 decades ago, reflecting a historic recent decline in mental health. So it's not just The Hill noticing this either. I mean, the rest of the media, along with our public health authorities, also insist that mental health is declining at a historic rate.
Yes.
Well, that's a funny thing, isn't it? Correlation doesn't always mean causation, but still, the correlation here is hard to ignore. Over the decades, we're told mental health is getting worse and worse, even though...
It makes me so angry. So listen, first and foremost, I want to recognize that a lot of his content is geared towards rage baiting and like whatever. I understand that. And also, I just can't sit idly by while somebody is spewing information that is so obviously fucking in bad faith and also false. Let's talk about the insinuation he's making here, because he's not even enough of a fucking grown-up or a professional to just outright say it. The subtext here is very much that like, if therapy rates are increasing, but mental health is getting worse, is it therapy that's making it worse? I'm like, no, bitch. No, it's not. Literally, that's not fucking how it works. The thing that I want to encourage people to remember is that therapy, first of all, is not like medical practice in the sense that like, if you have a sore throat, then you go to the doctor, they give you a pill, a spray, a salve, makes it better, right? And then it goes away. That's not how mental health therapy works. We've talked ad nauseum on this channel about how the science of like treating somebody's brain is somewhat complex and it's a little bit amorphous. And the thing that's important to remember is that no one person is ever going to be like done. That's not how it works. The brain, especially because it's unique in the sense that it's elastic, it evolves, it changes over time. It's highly adaptable, which also means then that it's susceptible to being damaged by like our life experiences and traumas and things like that. Means then that there is no finish line in regards to mental health. And this does not mean that every person should be in therapy forever. What this means is that it's entirely normal for someone to, for example, go to therapy to work on a trauma that they've survived, make some good progress around that, find a good sense of closure and resolution around that, move on with their lives, and then maybe at some point in their lives, because they're experiencing a heightened anxiety, because like, I don't know, maybe a fucking global pandemic happened, that people will go, when I went to therapy years ago for this traumatic thing, this was really helpful. I'm going to go back to therapy to work on this thing because I'm struggling, right? The other thing that's important for us to acknowledge here is that it's a lot easier for us to find finality in mental health treatment in regards to like, I went once and I don't need to go again, or I don't need to go for a really long time, when like the world isn't on fire, like literally and figuratively, when the state of affairs isn't like a fucking disaster. It's a lot easier for us to be calm about things, right? To not have like psychological distress. But the truth is that for most people, the way that our society is currently structured is marginalizing, it's oppressing, it's just sad generally. But also that a lot of us are being set up to fail, right? Like millennials are the first generation since like the 1800s that are going to be financially worse off than their parents were, which is noteworthy, right? Like to insist that these people should be completely mentally okay and not have psychological distress when we can see clearly that the social and cultural factors surrounding their lives are awful is just disingenuous. Like this is disingenuous and it's also not helpful, right? Like trying to deny the objective reality of the state of affairs is just not going to help anybody. Like we can try to like, but like it's just true, right? Like you can't make it not true that we are financially struggling, that we're socially struggling, that people are being oppressed and marginalized and discriminated against, that it's dangerous, that like people are being hate crimed, that there is still a global pandemic happening. To deny all of that is happening is just like useless in my opinion. That again, like living in denial about that is not going to improve your psychological health. And so again, when we talk about like the rising rates of therapy or why is therapy happening more often, why are people needing to go to therapy more, the answer oftentimes is in the world around us, right? I also want to be clear that people do this a lot when they talk about therapy and mental health, which is this individual blamey thing. Like, oh, there must be something wrong with you guys specifically. Like on the individual level, you're deeply flawed. And like, no, this is not true, especially because my education, both my bachelor's and my master's degree, are in social work, which features a heavy focus on the person and environment theory, essentially to mean that oftentimes when somebody is experiencing psychological distress, we're best served by first surveying their immediate surroundings and then their larger surroundings and then their larger cultural surroundings, right? If, for example, somebody is a queer, Black, disabled, neurodivergent person who's living in a world that is largely made for white, cisgender, neurotypical people, that's going to present you with some fucking issues, right? Especially if, for example, you were raised in a family that's highly religious, that's very repressive of queer and, non-normative identities, that's going to present itself with a lot of problems. And so the issue is not that your brain is uniquely flawed. It's that the immediate environment around you is not set up for you to succeed and will actively get in your way of being psychologically healthy. So this insinuation that like millennials or Gen Z people specifically are fucked up is false, but also like super lazy. This is the thing that irritates me about this is that it's lazy. Like there's not even a good faith effort at like initiating a conversation here. There's like the very obvious like, thing of like, well, maybe if we just ponder, like, no, you're literally just making stuff up. You're just saying things. It's almost like ChatGPT wrote his script and just like it's not even a good faith attempt at discourse here, which irritates the fuck out of me. Anyways, let's just keep going. Okay, let's talk more about this video.
More people go to therapy, and yet the problem only gets worse. There's a bit of a chicken and egg conundrum here, of course. Maybe more people are going to therapy because mental health is allegedly so bad. You could always argue.
Yeah.
But even then, if therapy works, if all of the collective billions that Americans have spent on therapy was actually money well spent, then shouldn't we see those benefits manifest themselves in the culture at some point?
So this is the thing. This is the other part of like the common discourse about like anti-therapy rhetoric that really irritates me is that we always frame it from this very capitalistic mindset where in order for therapy to be useful, it must manifest in outcomes that therefore benefit like society at large or like corporations. It makes you a better worker. It makes you better, more productive at things, which is not true, right? The truth is that the benefit of therapy is an intrinsic internal one that should not be about our ability to then feed back into the economy, for example. A lot of people have this perspective about therapy, which is because therapy has its roots in like some pretty problematic white man energy. That's important for us to acknowledge. And also, I think it's fair to say that the discipline is evolving over time to be a lot more inclusive and less fixated on this idea that the vehicle or the goal of therapy is to make better workers. The truth is that for a lot of clinicians, the work that we're doing with our clients is more so about improving people's quality of life, about making people feel more empowered, about connecting people to community, to an internal sense of worthiness, and that this manifests in healthier relationships both with themselves and with others, with generally an improved quality of life, with lower rates of psychological distress that are chronic or prolonged over time. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean that we're seeing these outcomes borne out in like, you know, our productivity at work or like people's ability to make more money, for example. That to me is very much like prescribing the oppressive circumstances that oftentimes created the psychological distress in the first place. And it's like a fundamentally fruitless exercise. So like generally speaking, really disagree with this premise, but also it's wrong, right? The idea that therapy is useless because it's not manifesting in like, I don't know, people being more productive at work is also not true, because the truth is that we as human beings are far more productive today than we ever have been, especially when we talk about things like work from home, the advent of technology making it much more feasible for us to multitask on a bunch of different things. People, generally speaking, are producing a lot more for mega corporations than they ever have, which we can see because we're drowning and corporations are making billions of fucking dollars off our back. So like, on both accounts, this man is wrong. But that's neither here nor there. Let's keep going.
Instead, we just see more and more people going to therapy while all the problems therapy is supposed to fix only continue to get worse and worse, year after year after year after year.
Yes, why is that?
Just to use a quick football analogy, shortly after the end of the 2022 season, the Baltimore Ravens fired their strength and conditioning coach by the name of Steve Saunders. He had been in that job for several years, and each year under his tenure, it seemed as though players were getting injured at an unusually high rate, and the problem only got worse over time. Mm-hmm. A rash of injuries plagued the Ravens every year. Now, you might argue that if players are getting injured a lot, that's all the more reason to not fire your strength and conditioning coach. He's got a lot of work to do. There's all the more reason why we need him. Just let him do his work. But of course, the trend indicates that whatever Steve Saunders was doing to help prevent injuries wasn't working. If you have a good strength and conditioning coach, you should find that player health and fitness is trending up. If it trends down year after year, it probably means that you need to seriously revamp your strength and conditioning department and fire the people in charge of it. So a similar point can be made about the people tasked with ensuring that the mental strength and conditioning of Americans. We have seen nothing but decline in that area, decade upon decade, which probably means that a whole lot of people in the mental health industry should be fired.
Because they're not being our kids.
Okay. There's so many flaws with this argument. I'm like, as a person, like a logical person, I'm deeply offended. So first and foremost, the idea that mental health care is at all similar to physical conditioning is a false premise from the outset. The reality, again, we talked about this earlier, but the reality is that our brain is a highly elastic organ, and it's incredibly unique in regards to our biology. Muscles are somewhat simple in their function, right? They've been well studied. We understand the functions and the circumstances that promote best performance of those particular bodily structures, right? The thing about the brain is that it's incredibly complex. It's not something that we can easily predict how it will respond to a specific stimuli, because everybody's brain is made up of very unique experiences. It's also informed by genetics, by our evolution, by things that we can't account for on a case-by-case basis. While muscles are relatively predictable in the way that they respond to a particular stimuli, brains are not. So the idea that we can just flex our brains like a muscle and just like work them out at the gym and therefore they'll be better and we'll see linear improvements over time is a fallacy. That's not true. That's not how the fucking brain works. Somebody who has at best a high school education and has failed up in several radio jobs wouldn't know that, and I wouldn't expect that from him, but I would at least hope that you have the grace and the decency to shut the fuck up about things that you don't know about. But that's fine. On top of that, the important thing to remember about mental health care is that it does not exist in a vacuum. While a strength and conditioning coach for a football team might be able to be evaluated based on the rates of injuries that are occurring, we can't do that with mental health because people's fucking brains don't exist in a vacuum. While we can accurately predict the circumstances and the environment in which people will be performing essentially for football, we can't do that with brains, because imagine that you have to live your normal life. So you have to go do stuff and be places and interact with people and be exposed to stimuli all fucking day, every day, that you can't account for, that you didn't consent to, that you don't want to, that you quite frankly have no control over. And so that complicates our ability to effectively care for and improve the quality of this very complex piece of biology. The idea that, first of all, we can compare these two things is elementary and insulting, but also is fucking not true. This is not true. This is not helpful. And I also just want to encourage people to remember that when people are using this really shaming rhetoric about mental health and like, well, you're going to therapy, but it's not getting better, they truly have no concept of how like the inner workings of therapy actually function. Because again, the truth is that being a clinician and like going to therapy, it's a somewhat amorphous process, right? You can take two people who have the exact same presenting issue, who have similar biology and backgrounds and cultures and trauma histories even, and their trajectory in therapy might look very different, especially again, when we look at what their immediate environment is going to be. This is why, in my opinion, clinicians need to be having very open and honest conversations with our clients about privilege, about oppression, about politics, because the truth is that a client who is a cis-het white woman or cis-het white man who's independently wealthy, who has an abundance of free time, who has the autonomy to make their own schedule, who has enough resources at his disposal to outsource things that are being a drain on their mental health, is going to fare far better in mental health services than somebody who is a queer, black, disabled, neurodivergent person who is not independently wealthy, who does not have the resources to like afford reliable transportation, let alone things like childcare and putting food on the table, health insurance, things like that. And all of that is going to affect their ability to not just do well in therapy, but also to reliably and consistently access those services, which we know from the research is also one of the most important things when we talk about somebody being able to make good and like far-reaching strides in therapy. It's just all wrong, and it's irritating and also stupid.
Macro societal level, there simply is no reason to believe that most of these people are doing us any good at all. On the micro level, you can see this as well. It's not a coincidence that many of the worst and most dysfunctional people you'll ever meet have been in therapy for years. There's no sign that it's doing them any good, that it's prompting any improvements, but they keep at it. You know, it reminds you of a morbidly obese person who's been seeing a dietitian for 15 years.
Hit them all.
I knew that was going to come up in this video. I just made a huge, very long and very in-depth video about fat phobia. I will link that up here if you want to watch that, because it's a really important and very educational piece of content, in my opinion. However, this is also, again, just like the laziest false equivalency that I've ever seen. This is like saying people who are chronically ill are at the doctor a lot, and so therefore the doctors are making them sick. Huh? What are you talking about? Like, that's not true, nor is it helpful. Like, you could draw all sorts of false equivalencies with any two random pieces of data, right? Like, people who go to the grocery store a lot and also are funny are taking stand-up comedy classes at the grocery store then. Like, see, we just made that up, and that's not true or real. Like, we could draw any number of false equivalencies with very little effort, but that doesn't make them true, right? Like, just, I have pink hair and I also have diarrhea a lot. And so therefore I am having diarrhea because of my pink hair. See how stupid that sounds? Truly unhinged fucking behavior. This is so stupid. And it's also embarrassing. This is embarrassing. Whatever.
Something just isn't working here. Now, you see the morbidly obese person and you find out they're seeing a dietitian. You say, well, that's good. That's the kind of person who needs a dietitian. But then you hear, oh, I've been going to this guy for 15 years. Okay, unless you started at 7,000 pounds and now you're down to 300, unless that's the case, then clearly there's a problem with the dietitian. Something's not working here. Yesterday on the members block, we watched this video of a twice divorced woman explaining why none of the bad things in her life are her fault. Let's watch that again.
Things I stopped with after my divorce. People who judge me based off of my choices. Oh, you would never get a divorce no matter what? Cool. Well, I've had two. Be well. Also stopped with the narrative that something was wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with me. Things happened to me that made me the person that I was and have the struggles that I had. You can fix that. Anything that you don't like, anything that is no longer serving you, change it. Change it. Go to therapy. Do the journaling. Practice meditation. Do the things that you need to do to be the person you want to be.
Go to therapy, she says. If we can assume that she's taken her own advice, we see again how therapy has not helped this truly awful person be any less awful. If anything, it seems to have reinforced all of her worst attitudes and beliefs.
Like what?
By the way, this woman, Leah Marie is her name. She is a life coach who specializes in helping coach women through their own divorces. The About Me on her website says this: my second divorce was the ugliest wake-up call ever. That's when I knew I needed to do things differently if I was going to find the happiness I really wanted. So I did all the things: therapy, journaling, meditation, reading books, listening to podcasts. I wanted to learn as much as I could about rebuilding my self-esteem, loving myself, taking better care of myself, and knowing my worth.
What a sin.
She went to therapy apparently and discovered that nothing is her fault, that everything is everyone else's fault, that she's been divorced twice, and yet it was something that happened to her each time, not something that she did or is at fault for.
Sorry, did we watch the same video? Did I just hallucinate? This woman literally made a TikTok saying, I've been divorced twice. I decided that I wanted to work on myself. And so therefore I took personal responsibility to go to therapy, to listen to podcasts, to read self-help books, to do journaling, and to participate in all of these essentially health promoting behaviors. But she apparently is like, this is like the boomer entitlement thing. They just want stuff for themselves, blah, 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 blah. Like, literally, no. This woman literally took responsibility for her own shortcomings and worked to improve them. Listen, I don't know who this person is, to be clear. I'm not like endorsing her necessarily. I don't know anything about her, but I do just want to draw attention to the fact that this is a willful misinterpretation of what this woman just said. This is like so obviously bad faith engagement. Ew, he's so weird looking. Anyways, let's keep going.
And now she's on a journey of trying to live the most selfish life she possibly can, while helping other women do the same. By its fruits shall we know it, and the fruits, as we have seen with therapy, are very rotten indeed. Now, there's a lot that goes into this, many culprits that could be named.
The thing that is so funny to me about this, though, is his assertion that, like, you know, whatever the results of therapy are, is how we can judge therapy as an institution, and so we can see that the results of therapy are bad. And yet, we've presented zero evidence for the truth of that. So far at this point, we've showcased a TikTok from a woman that we don't know who said that she took her own accountability for herself and by and large seems to be living a better life because of it. We've read an article from The Hill that simply outlines that Americans are going to therapy at higher rates now than they ever have. And also that mental illness is continuing to get worse, again, likely because of the societal impact on our lives. Research, source, can I get a source, please? Nothing. There's literally zero evidence that this man has presented to prove that therapy is worthless, useless, or bad even. Like, okay.
A lot driving the problem, but I would like to suggest that part of the issue is that in many cases, not all but many, therapy turns out to be not only a waste of time, but something that will ultimately do more harm than good.
Prove it.
Now, why might that be the case? Well, for one thing, as is the case with whoever has been counseling Leah Marie, the divorce coach, that we just watched, A great many therapists and psychologists and counselors and others in the psych industry have a deeply and fundamentally disordered view of humanity and what constitutes healthy behavior and good habits of thought and action. If therapy has any chance of helping you at all, it depends largely on the assumption that the therapist will have correct and useful insights into life and the human condition.
Which, imagine that. We go to school. I know that you've never been to college, Matt, so you're probably not familiar with what formal education looks like. But there is a whole discipline whose job it is to inform clinicians about the evidence-based practice, I know that's a lot of big words, for how to best help people with their mental health. This is not a complex issue. This is not a difficult to understand subject. People do it all the time in all of their different disciplines, right? That's like saying, well, supposedly dentists know things about teeth, but we don't know. They could just be saying stuff. They have a flawed view of humanity. And so who are they to talk about your teeth? Hello? This is the most nonsensical... Whatever.
But there is no license, there's no degree, there's no resume, there's no credential that ensures that someone is wise and insightful, much less that they have a correct understanding of the human condition.
Real quick, I want to point out, again, just the flaw in this logic here, which is that in order to be a good therapist, you have to be wise and have a good insight into humanity, which you can't account for in like science or degrees or things like that, which first of all is not true. But second of all, not the point. In order to be a good clinician, you don't need to be wise, you need to be educated about evidence-based practice. Like generally speaking, I think have like a fair amount of compassion and, empathy for human beings. And granted, those aren't things that can necessarily be taught. However, there is very much education that can be doled out and training that can be provided that improves people's ability to be in touch with those things. And just because Matt Walsh doesn't understand the mechanism by which we do that doesn't mean it's not real.
Not only have no special insight into any of this, but in fact are more confused than half of the people who come to see them seeking guidance.
What proof do you have of
Consider
this?
the fact that many people who declare themselves trans have this idea first suggested to them by a therapist or a counselor. This issue alone absolutely proves that the therapy industry is a disaster. Most therapists will not only affirm the notion that a woman can be trapped in a man's body, but will even suggest it. Now,
this is, again, a lazy talking point because, again, I want to point out in the same way that we talked about ADHD or autism earlier, the truth is that trans people have existed for millennia. We may not have had the same language around this topic or especially the same social awareness for that. That doesn't mean it's not real. Doesn't mean it wasn't happening. We can see that trans people have existed for millennia in humans, but also that transness is intrinsic and like biologically natural, not just in the human species, but in a variety of animal species. The truth is that nature, biology, Mother Nature is queer. This is a well-accepted scientific fact. The idea even that like sex is biologically one or the other, that sex exists in a binary is false. Again, intersex people have existed for millennia. Intersex creatures have existed for millennia. This is not new. This is not groundbreaking information. This is well accepted by people who abide by normal evidence-based science. And this is not a controversial issue. The other thing here is that this assertion that therapists are the people who are suggesting that people be trans as if that's a thing that you can decide in the first place. Again, I'd love a source for this. I'd love to see what data, what research, even self-report data, polls, aggregate data, anything that Matt Walsh has to provide about this, because this is not something that is like well established as a fact. This is literally something that this man just made up.
If your problems have nothing to do with gender and you have your head screwed on straight enough anyway that you aren't worried about being coaxed and developing your own case of dysphoria, maybe you wonder, well, do I have to worry about this? Even if the therapist endorses gender theory, is that a problem for me? But you still have to worry about it because you have to ask yourself, is the therapist that you're paying an exorbitant hourly rate to the kind of person who thinks women can be trapped in men's bodies? And if so, this is a person so delusional, so confused, so captured by far-left ideology that their insights cannot possibly be trusted on any subject at all. And yet the majority of therapists fall into this category.
First of all, that's not true. I just want to be super clear. Much to my dismay, there are lots of ultra-conservative therapists that exist. This idea that conservative, Christian, backwards therapists don't exist is by and large false. That's very much not the case. Not that I think that should be the case, but it is. And also, again, I just really want to outline the fact that we are reaching so far to try to make the case that therapy is useless, and we've still yet to provide like a source or any kind of evidence, any kind of facts or figures or research or data to prove that this is the case. He's literally just making stuff up.
But also so useless, but so powerful that it can turn
Yes. That's a really good point, actually. I don't know if you heard Aaron just now, but this is very much like the fascist ideology that your enemy is both completely ineffectual and useless, but also at the same time so dangerous that they can single-handedly turn the tide of all of our social norms. And like, this is made up. This is also, again, a fascist ideology that is as old as time itself. It's tired, it's embarrassing, and it's also stupid.
But the pitfalls with therapy don't just lie with the fact that so many therapists are bad and stupid. Before we can even get to the point of analyzing the quality of the therapist, we have to deal with the problems inherent to the very practice of therapy itself. And the biggest one is this, that many people go to therapy simply because they want to talk about themselves. It feeds their narcissistic impulse to talk incessantly and think incessantly about themselves. This is the real reason why therapy is so popular in our culture and why it becomes more popular with each generation. It's not that mental health is declining, it's that narcissism is increasing. And narcissism is not so much a mental health problem as a character flaw. And this is primarily what drives the mad rush to therapy. Lots of narcissists who are willing to pay by the hour just to have the privilege of having a 60-minute block reserved exclusively to conversation focused on themselves. But this is exactly the opposite of what many of these people need.
First of all, let's just be clear, let's level set about the fact that narcissistic personality disorder is a legitimate diagnosis in the DSM-5. And don't get me wrong, the DSM is a tool of oppression in a lot of ways. It's problematic for a number of reasons that we're not going to get into today. However, the truth is that narcissistic personality disorder is in fact a legitimate diagnosis. And also, can we please, God, just fucking unlearn the stigma associated with cluster B personality disorders? Because the truth is that you can have narcissistic personality disorder, any of the other cluster B disorders, and be a good person. Be a person who's doing the work, who's showing up to therapy, who's making a conscious and consistent effort to be your best self, to show up safely in relationships, who can form healthy and safe relationships in a variety of different ways. This idea that people with narcissistic personality disorder are like the others on the fringes of society is, first of all, wrong, but second of all, anti-mental health, especially if you are a person who is pro-mental health and pro-like destigmatizing mental health. That should mean all mental illnesses, not just the ones that are convenient or easy to advocate for, not just the ones that we resonate with, but all mental illness. And the truth is that narcissistic personality disorder is a mental illness just like all the rest of them. Please stop fucking saying these things. And please, God, I'm begging you, stop calling people narcissists on the internet. It's not helpful. It's reductionist. It's usually false. And it also just does not serve the purpose of like advancing the mental health field and like destigmatizing mental illness and all the things we already talked about. On top of that, the idea that people go to therapy solely to talk about themselves is false in the first place. Oftentimes people talk about the problematic people in their lives a lot more than they talk about themselves. But even if that were the case, this is not like a smoking gun that all of these people are narcissists. I also just want to be clear that it's very human and very normal to want to talk about ourselves, to want to feel seen, to want to have our experiences validated and understood and empathized with. This is a feature of just existing as a human being on planet Earth. And if anyone tells you that they don't like that or don't care about that, they likely have some amount of denial or like work that they need to do on themselves, because the truth is that while we will all land in slightly different places with how much we like to talk about ourselves, our comfort with talking about ourselves, our ability to feel safe in being vulnerable in talking about ourselves, the truth is that it is very normal and human to want to talk about ourselves and to feel, again, like validated and seen. This is the very nature by which we develop relationships. This is the vehicle by which we feel seen in our relationships, is by sharing about ourselves and then hearing about other people share about themselves. This is a fundamental human nature.
What they need instead is to stop talking about themselves, stop thinking about themselves, stop dwelling on their own petty problems, stop trying to make every obstacle they face into some great saga of trial and triumph, and instead just go live their lives with some humility and sense of perspective.
Yeah, no, definitely.
The best advice anyone can give you for 90% of the problems that you bring to a therapist is this: get over yourself and quit whining. Go for a jog, get a hobby, do something.
Which is clearly working really well for Matt Walsh, as we can all see. Him adopting this perspective has presented us with such a stable and healthy human being that he makes content trying to neg people for a living. Okay.
Something more, just don't buy goats. Do something more interesting with your life than constantly analyzing your own feelings. Your feelings aren't that interesting or important. Are you sad? Are you stressed out? Well, welcome to human existence. Okay, that's part of the bargain. Not every difficult emotion or personal experience needs to be hashed out and analyzed and focused on.
This is so sad.
You shouldn't even need to talk about most of it. Life is hard. Yours probably isn't as hard as you think. If you have enough money to spend $150 an hour to talk about yourself, that automatically means you have an easier life than like 3 billion other people on the planet.
First of all, that's not true. Second of all, sliding fee scale, discounted services, grant-funded therapy services are a real thing. Lots of people access therapy at a lower price point than $150 an hour. And also, the oppression Olympics thing of like somebody has it worse than you and so therefore you're not allowed to feel sad sucks. This is not true. It's also fundamentally unhelpful. The thing that I tell my clients all the time is that it does not matter if you feel like your feelings are not rational or not justified, because the fact of the matter is that you do feel that way, right? It's a fruitless exercise to try to interrogate your emotions and say, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm not allowed to feel this way. It's wrong for me to feel this way. It's embarrassing or shameful or bad for me to feel this way. Because you still do. You still do. And emotions are a function of the human body in the same way that our need to urinate or defecate or eat or sleep. All of these things add up to a picture of our body regulating itself. Emotions are no different, right? The truth is that emotional catharsis provides us with a very real physiological and psychological benefit that improves our quality of life, that improves our ability to be present and safe in our relationships, that improves our ability to just like be present in life generally. To say that people should never talk about their feelings, that you should just suck it up, buttercup, is like so sad and reductionist, but also, again, I think a vehicle into the quality of life that somebody like Matt Walsh is living. First of all, I don't buy that this is true because I know for a fact that this man has punched a wall probably after a football game, so I don't buy for one fucking second that he doesn't experience emotions. But second of all, even if that were the case, that does not mean his quality of life is better. I can guarantee you, especially based on what we know in the research about people who have done the work to be psychologically or like feel safe to experience like emotional catharsis and to express that, to share that, to have other people receive that, is that their quality of life, generally speaking, is better, right? This is a flex in our ability to relate to ourselves and our ability to participate safely in relationships. There are numerous benefits to being a person whose emotional intelligence is such that we can express our emotions safely, effectively, and to have those like heard and empathized with especially. And so like, again, I don't think anybody's like really taking advice from Matt Walsh who's not like, you know, but to be clear, this is all terrible advice and is literally the opposite of conventional wisdom about all things mental health and therapy.
I mean, there's a whole family starving to death in a hut made out of plywood somewhere in the world while you cry to a therapist that your dad missed your dance recital when you were 7 years old.
This is so racist also.
This doesn't mean that none of your problems are serious, but it does mean that most of them probably aren't. Most of your complaints you should keep to yourself and tell no one and move on with your life.
Why?
You should have a whole host of worries and concerns that you have never told anyone, that nobody knows about, because you carry them yourself with quiet dignity.
That's not dignified at all.
If you are the sort of person who has never had a problem you didn't tell someone about, or a complaint you didn't complain about, then therapy is the last thing you need. Except for the therapy I'm giving you right now, the therapy that says, grow up, you whiny child. This is what a huge number of therapy customers need to hear, but they won't hear it because most therapists won't say it or anything like it. Just
really quick, I know we're done with this video. At this point, it's like such obvious rage baiting that it's just like sad and annoying. But also, just really quick, I do also want to address this because this criticism exists in a couple of different forms. The idea that therapist's job is to just like blow smoke up our clients' asses. This is not true, right? The role of a good therapist is sometimes to tell our clients like, that one's you, right? Like sometimes it's you and this time it is. And it's a difficult conversation to have. I think good therapists are able to have this conversation with empathy and compassion without stigmatizing somebody to the dickens. But it's sometimes a necessary conversation to have. And so I do want to be clear that therapists are not yes men, right? We're not people who are just going to like, woo, all of your bad behavior or problematic patterns or, especially like harmful thoughts to yourself. We are sometimes people who hold a mirror up to our clients and say like, listen, I support you. I care deeply about you. I am here in your corner to support you and I am on your team. And also, this was bad, right? This behavior is not serving you. This relationship pattern is not helping you. That was a hurtful or, unhealthy thing for you to say or do to somebody else. And we can work on that, right? I want to be clear that therapy is not simply about having someone listen to you. It's not simply about having somebody fist pump at you or celebrate your every move and breath. It's about the deep inner work that we need to do on ourselves, and having a person who's safe to do that with and who's educated about the best and safest ways for you to do that, and to also be objective about what's going on for you. This is also why, for example, therapists can't therapize our friends or people that we know, because it's impossible for us to be objective about that, which is the thing that helps people make the most meaningful change in therapy, is when a therapist is able to zoom out and be outside of the situation to see everything objectively. Again, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that I am deeply put off by whatever the fuck this is, but I do just want to be clear, please avoid this content at all costs. I say this with all of the other, like critique commentary that we make on this channel also, but please avoid hate watching, leaving trolling comments and things like that, because all it does is improve their algorithm and improves their engagement rates and provides them with a further leg to stand on for things like sponsorships and especially like show renewals and things like that for Matt Walsh. So please avoid, let's all just like collectively commit to gray rocking people like Matt Walsh, because this sucks. So if you like this video, you can like the video. We do talk about stuff like this, and we also do an educational moment, so I'd love to have you stay for that. If you don't know, by the way, I stream every Friday, and we have a podcast episode go up on every Thursday. So if you want to come hang out with me in other places, you can do that there too. But in the meantime, you can share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow, and I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay.